The morning sun cast long shadows across the Zephyrian breeding grounds as Maya Chen adjusted her field research equipment. The young xenobiology student had traveled 3 star systems to study the magnificent Drachmori, reptilian beings whose iridescent scales shifted colors with their emotions. She'd dreamed of this moment since her first year at the Galactic University, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to witness. Elder Thraxus emerged from the ceremonial hatching chamber, his normally brilliant emerald scales dulled to a sickly brown. Behind him followed a procession of Drachmori elders, their scale patterns displaying the deep purples and blacks of profound disappointment. Maya's translator earpiece crackled as Thraxus spoke to the gathered crowd. "The Great Mother has blessed us with 15 healthy hatchlings," his voice carried across the breeding grounds. "They shall bring honor to our houses and strengthen our bloodlines." The gathered Drachmori erupted in celebratory hisses and scale-flashing displays of joy. Maya raised her recording device, documenting the cultural significance of the hatching ceremony. Among her research, she'd learned that Drachmori reproduction was incredibly rare. Their species only produced offspring once every 7 years, and the survival rate was typically less than 50%. Each healthy hatchling represented the future of their civilization, but Thraxus wasn't finished speaking. His scales shifted to a darker shade and the celebration quieted. "However," he continued, his voice heavy with what Maya's cultural training told her was shame, "there were also 3 aberrations. 3 cursed ones who bear the mark of the void." 3 smaller figures were pushed forward from the chamber. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she saw them clearly for the first time. Unlike their siblings' jewel-toned scales that sparkled in the sunlight, these 3 hatchlings were completely white. Their scales held no color whatsoever, appearing almost translucent in the bright light. Their eyes, instead of the typical golden or amber of their species, were a pale pink that seemed to glow faintly. The albino hatchlings huddled together, clearly sensing the hostility radiating from the crowd. Maya noticed they were significantly smaller than their siblings, their movements more tentative. One of them, barely larger than Maya's hand, stumbled and fell. When none of the adults moved to help, the smallest of the 3 helped their sibling back to their feet. "In accordance with the ancient laws," Thraxus announced, "these cursed ones cannot remain among us. Their presence would bring misfortune to our people and weaken our bloodlines. They must be cast out before the sun reaches its peak." Maya's stomach churned as she realized what she was witnessing. The Drachmori were preparing to abandon 3 newborn hatchlings simply because of their coloration. Her research had mentioned ancient superstitions, but she'd assumed they were merely historical curiosities, not actively practiced traditions. Dr. Korthak, her Drachmori research supervisor, approached her with scales flickering nervously. "Miss Chen, you must understand. This is necessary for the survival of our species. The albino curse has been documented for millennia. They bring only death and misfortune." "But they're just babies," Maya protested, struggling to keep her voice professional. "Surely there must be scientific data about this supposed curse." Dr. Korthak's scales shifted to uncomfortable yellows and grays. "There are stories. Ancient texts speak of albino Drachmori who brought plagues, caused crop failures, and attracted predators to settlements. We cannot risk the safety of the healthy hatchlings." Maya bit back her response, remembering her diplomatic training. She was here as an observer and researcher, not to interfere with alien cultures. But as she watched the 3 small figures being herded away from their siblings, every instinct screamed against the injustice. The separation ritual was swift and brutal in its efficiency. The healthy hatchlings were claimed by various family groups, carried away to begin their new lives. The albino trio was led to the edge of the settlement, where the cultivated land gave way to wild forest. Maya followed at a distance, her camera recording everything. At the boundary marker, Thraxus performed what appeared to be a blessing, or perhaps a farewell. His scales rippled with patterns Maya couldn't interpret, but the sadness in his posture was unmistakable. Despite their beliefs, this wasn't easy for him. "May you find peace in the wilderness," he said formally. "And may your curse die with you, sparing future generations." The 3 hatchlings pressed closer together as the adults turned and walked away. Maya watched in horror as the youngest began making small, pitiful sounds that needed no translation. They were crying for their parents, for the warmth of the breeding chambers, for the family that had just abandoned them. As the Drachmori delegation disappeared back toward the settlement, Maya found herself alone with the three outcasts. They hadn't noticed her yet, too focused on their immediate distress. She knew she should return to the settlement, continue her research, and write up her observations like any good xenobiologist. But Maya had never been good at following rules when those rules meant cruelty. She approached slowly, remembering her training about non-threatening postures with unfamiliar species. The hatchlings noticed her movement and turned, their pale eyes wide with fear. Maya knelt down, making herself as small and non-threatening as possible. "Hey there, little ones," she said softly, knowing they couldn't understand her words but hoping her tone would convey friendliness. "I'm not going to hurt you." The largest of the three, barely the size of a house cat, stepped protectively in front of the other two. Despite being abandoned and terrified, it was still trying to protect its siblings. Maya felt her heart break a little more. She slowly reached into her pack and pulled out one of her emergency ration bars. Breaking off a small piece, she offered it to the brave little guardian. The hatchling sniffed cautiously, its head tilting in curiosity. Apparently deciding Maya wasn't an immediate threat, it accepted the food and shared it with the others. As Maya watched them eat, her mind raced. She couldn't leave them here to die. Every principle she'd been raised with, every human value of protecting the innocent and vulnerable, rebelled against walking away. But she was also an off-world researcher with strict protocols about cultural interference. The smallest hatchling finished its portion of food and looked up at her with those strange, pale eyes. In that moment, Maya made a decision that would change not just her life, but potentially the relationship between humans and Drakmori forever. She was going to ask if she could keep them. Maya's hands trembled as she approached the settlement's administrative building. The three albino hatchlings rode in a specially padded container she'd fashioned from her equipment case, their pale eyes peering nervously at their surroundings. She'd spent the entire night at the forest edge with them, sharing her rations and trying to keep them warm with her emergency thermal blankets. The Drakmori who saw her passing stopped and stared, their scales shifting through patterns of confusion and disgust. Some hissed warnings to their children to stay away from the cursed ones. Maya ignored them all, focused entirely on her mission. Dr. Korthak's office was located in the highest spire of the settlement, its walls covered with traditional Drakmori artwork depicting their proud history. When Maya entered carrying her makeshift container, his scales immediately flushed a deep, angry red. "Miss Chen, what is the meaning of this?" His voice carried the unmistakable tone of barely controlled rage. "Why have you brought those creatures here?" Maya set the container down carefully and straightened her shoulders. "Dr. Korthak, I'm formally requesting permission to adopt these three hatchlings and transport them back to human space for study." The silence that followed was so complete that Maya could hear the soft rustling of the hatchlings in their container. Dr. Korthak's scales cycled through what she'd learned, were the Drakmori equivalent of speechlessness, shifting rapidly between colors with no coherent pattern. "You cannot be serious," he finally managed. "Those are not pets, Miss Chen. They are cursed beings that will bring only misfortune. And even if they weren't, they are still Drakmori. We do not simply give away our offspring to alien species. But you were going to let them die," Maya countered, her diplomatic training warring with her moral outrage. "If they're truly cursed and unwanted, what harm could there be in letting me take them?" "Consider it. Disposal of hazardous materials." Dr. Korthak's scales flushed darker. "You do not understand the implications of what you're asking. These creatures are not meant to survive. They are nature's mistakes, aberrations that threaten the genetic purity of our species." "Then why not let me prove that wrong?" Maya leaned forward, sensing an opening. "If they're truly as cursed as you believe, they'll die in my care and you'll be vindicated. But if they survive and thrive, perhaps your people's understanding of albinism needs updating." The container rustled, and one of the hatchlings made a small sound. Dr. Korthak's scales shifted to an uncomfortable yellow-green as his eyes fell on the container. Despite his harsh words, Maya caught something that looked almost like regret in his expression. "The Council of Elders would never approve such a request," he said finally. "The precedent alone would be catastrophic. What if other off-worlders began demanding our offspring? What if they decided our normal hatchlings were worth collecting?" Maya had anticipated this objection. "Then make it a special case. A one-time scientific study specifically focused on albino Drakmori. No precedent for healthy offspring, just a way to study genetic abnormalities that your people consider cursed anyway. Dr. Korthak was quiet for a long moment, his scales slowly shifting to more contemplative blues and purples. Even if the council were to consider such a proposal, there would be conditions, strict protocols, and the likelihood of approval is minimal at best. I understand, Maya said quickly, but you'll present the request? Before Dr. Korthak could answer, the office door burst open. Elder Thraxus swept in, his scales a furious crimson that made Dr. Korthak's earlier anger look mild by comparison. Behind him came two other elders Maya didn't recognize, their own scales displaying aggressive patterns. Is it true? Thraxus demanded, his voice carrying the authority of centuries. Has this alien brought the cursed ones back to our settlement? Maya stood her ground, though her heart was racing. Elder Thraxus, I've come to request formal adoption of the 3 albino hatchlings. I believe they can contribute to scientific understanding of Drakmori genetics. The elder's laugh was harsh and bitter. Scientific understanding? Foolish human, you know nothing of what you're meddling with. Those creatures are touched by the void itself. They will bring nothing but death and destruction. Then why not let me take that risk? Maya challenged. If they're truly cursed, the curse will follow them away from your people. If they're not, then 3 innocent lives will be saved. One of the other elders, an ancient female with scales so dark they appeared black, stepped forward. Tell me, young human, what do you know of our history? Of the last time albino hatchlings were allowed to live. Maya's research had been thorough, but she sensed this was a test. I know that historical records mention albino births, but the documentation is sparse. Most accounts are second-hand stories passed down through oral tradition. The ancient female's scales shifted slightly, and Maya caught what might have been approval. At least you admit the limits of your knowledge. 700 years ago, during the time of burning skies, 3 albino hatchlings were born. The council of that era, influenced by off-world ideas about genetic diversity, decided to allow them to live. Maya waited, sensing the importance of this moment. Within a season, the elder continued, plague swept through our settlements. The crops failed. Predators that had never dared approach our territory began attacking in broad daylight. By year's end, nearly half our population was dead. Correlation isn't causation, Maya said carefully. There could have been dozens of factors contributing to those disasters. Perhaps, Thraxus interjected, but are you willing to bet the lives of our people on your human skepticism? The container rustled again, and this time one of the hatchlings made a sound that was unmistakably distressed. Maya looked down to see the smallest one trying to climb out, its pale scales almost translucent in the office lighting. Without thinking, she reached down and gently lifted it out, cradling it against her chest. The room fell silent as the tiny creature settled against Maya's warmth, its distressed sounds quieting to soft purrs. The other 2 hatchlings immediately began calling for their sibling, their own distress evident. Look at them, Maya said softly, lifting the other 2 hatchlings out as well. They're not monsters or cursed beings. They're babies who just want to be safe and loved. How can saving innocent lives be wrong? Elder Thraxus stared at the scene, his scales cycling through patterns Maya couldn't interpret. The ancient female stepped closer, studying the hatchlings with an intensity that made Maya nervous. They're smaller than normal hatchlings, the female observed, and their bonding behavior seems accelerated. Maya nodded. They've been through trauma. Of course they're clinging to the first source of safety they've found. Or, Thraxus said grimly, they're already beginning to exert their cursed influence over you. Despite the tension, Maya felt a spark of hope. They were at least discussing the hatchlings as individuals now, not just as abstract sources of doom. It was progress, however small. The council chamber was unlike anything Maya had ever seen. Circular tiers of polished stone rose toward a domed ceiling that displayed the constellations visible from Zephyr Prime. 12 elder Drakmori sat in positions that seemed to correspond to astrological significance, their scales creating a living mosaic of colors that shifted with their emotions and thoughts. Maya stood in the center of the chamber, the 3 albino hatchlings resting in a transparent carrier that allowed the council to observe them clearly. Over the past 3 days, while waiting for this hearing, she'd grown even more attached to the small creatures. They'd begun responding to her voice, and the largest one had started following her around her quarters whenever she let them out of their enclosure. Elder Thraxus occupied the highest position, his scales displaying formal patterns of authority. "The council will hear the human's petition," he announced, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Speak, Maya Chen of Earth." Maya had rehearsed this moment countless times, but facing the assembled power of Drakmori civilization still made her knees weak. "Honored elders, I come before you with a request that benefits both our species. These 3 hatchlings represent a unique opportunity for scientific advancement." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, scales shifting to skeptical yellows and dismissive grays. Maya pressed on, knowing she had one chance to make her case. "Your people fear these hatchlings because of ancient superstitions. But what if those fears are preventing you from understanding a genetic gift rather than a curse? Albinism in many species often comes with enhanced sensory capabilities. These hatchlings might possess abilities that could benefit all Drakmori." The ancient female elder Maya had met before, who she'd learned was called High Curator Visara, leaned forward. "You speak of gifts, young human. What evidence do you have for such claims?" Maya activated her portable holographic display, showing genetic analyses she'd conducted with her field equipment. Initial scans show these hatchlings have significantly different neural patterns compared to normal Drakmori baseline data. Their sensory organs appear more developed, and their brain chemistry shows elevated levels of compounds associated with enhanced perception. "Interesting," Visara mused, her scales shifting to thoughtful blues. "And what do you propose to do with this supposed enhanced perception?" "Study it," Maya said simply, "in a controlled environment where they can be observed and protected. If my theories are correct, understanding their abilities could lead to advances in Drakmori medicine, technology, even space navigation." Elder Morvac, whose scales displayed the deep purples of ancient wisdom, spoke for the first time. "And if your theories are wrong? If these creatures are indeed cursed as our ancestors believed?" Maya had known this question would come. "Then they will be safely contained away from your people, and any negative effects will be limited to my research facility. You lose nothing and gain the knowledge that your beliefs were correct." The smallest hatchling chose that moment to make one of its soft, purring sounds, and Maya saw several elders' scales shift to more neutral colors. Despite their fears, the tiny creatures were undeniably appealing. "There is another consideration," Thraxus said, his tone carefully neutral. "The human bonding we have observed. These creatures have already begun imprinting on Miss Chen. Is this not evidence of their unnatural influence?" Maya had expected this accusation too. "Respectfully, Elder Thraxus' rapid bonding behavior is common in many species when offspring are separated from their birth group. It's a survival mechanism, not supernatural influence. The hatchlings are simply seeking the safety and security they lost when they were exiled." Visara's scales shifted to patterns Maya was learning indicated deep thought. "Show us these bonding behaviors, human. Let the hatchlings out of their container." Maya's heart raced. This was either an opportunity or a trap. She carefully opened the carrier and lifted out the 3 hatchlings. As expected, they immediately clustered around her, the largest one climbing up to perch on her shoulder while the other 2 settled in the crooks of her arms. "Observe," Visara said to the council. "The creatures show no fear of this chamber, despite the presence of 12 adult Drakmori. Either they are too young to recognize potential threats or they sense no threat from us," completed Elder Jorvanth, his scales displaying surprise. That level of social intelligence is remarkable for hatchlings barely a week old. The middle-sized hatchling suddenly lifted its head, its pale eyes focusing on something beyond Maya's perception. A moment later, a small maintenance drone entered the chamber through a service panel, its mechanical humming barely audible to Maya's ears. The hatchling had detected it long before anyone else. "Enhanced hearing," Maya noted, trying to keep her excitement controlled. "Possibly enhanced beyond normal Drakmori ranges." Visara's scales shifted to definite interest. "Test the others." Maya gently encouraged the smallest hatchling to focus on the far side of the chamber. Its pale eyes tracked movement that Maya couldn't see, following what appeared to be air currents or perhaps minute changes in temperature. The largest hatchling, meanwhile, was staring directly at Elder Morvac with what looked like fascination. "It's looking at your scale patterns," Maya realized. "It might be seeing chromatophore changes that haven't even manifested visibly yet." Elder Morvac's scales were indeed beginning to shift, moving from purple toward interested green even as Maya spoke. The hatchling was reading his emotional state before it became visible to anyone else. Remarkable, Visara murmured. If these sensory enhancements are genuine, the applications could be extraordinary. Navigation through asteroid fields, early detection of equipment failures, perhaps even predicting seismic events. But Thraxus was not convinced. Pretty tricks do not undo 7 centuries of documented evidence about the albino curse. Have you considered, High Curator, that these enhanced abilities might be how they spread their misfortune? The chamber fell silent as the elders considered this possibility. Maya felt her hope beginning to fade until the smallest hatchling did something unexpected. It squirmed out of her arms and walked directly toward Thraxus, showing no fear of the imposing elder. Thraxus's scales immediately flushed warning red, but the hatchling simply sat down at his feet and began making the soft purring sounds that indicated contentment. After a moment, it curled up into a small ball and appeared to fall asleep. It trusts you, Maya said softly. Complete innocent trust from a creature that has every reason to fear your kind. Thraxus stared down at the sleeping hatchling, his scales cycling through patterns Maya had never seen before. The sight of something so small and vulnerable choosing to seek comfort from someone who had condemned it to death seemed to shake him profoundly. This changes nothing, he said finally. But his voice lacked its earlier conviction. One cannot base policy on emotional manipulation. Perhaps not, Visara replied, her scales displaying the deep wisdom patterns of a decision-maker. But one can base policy on potential benefit versus proven risk. I moved to grant the humans' petition under strict research protocols. The vote that followed was closer than Maya had dared hope. 7 elders voted in favor, 5 against. As the results were announced, Maya scooped up the sleeping hatchling and felt tears of relief threatening to overwhelm her composure. The conditions will be extensive, Thraxus warned, his scales still displaying conflict. Regular reports, genetic monitoring, and the right to terminate the arrangement if any evidence of negative effects emerges. Understood, Maya agreed quickly. Thank you, all of you. I promise you won't regret this decision. As she prepared to leave the chamber with her new charges, Visara called out one final condition. The research partnership will be joint human. Dr. Korthak will accompany you to monitor Drakmori interests. These hatchlings may be exiled from our world, but they remain our people. Maya nodded, understanding the wisdom in the arrangement. As she carried the 3 sleeping hatchlings toward their new life, she couldn't help but wonder if she was about to prove that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. The research station orbiting Kepler 442b was a marvel of human engineering. But Maya barely noticed the spectacular view of the planet below as she watched her 3 charges explore their new home. 6 months had passed since leaving Zephyr Prime, and the albino hatchlings had grown remarkably. What had once been tiny creatures the size of house cats were now adolescent Drakmori, the size of large dogs, their pale scales shimmering with an opalescent quality that seemed to shift with the lighting. Dr. Korthak emerged from his laboratory. His scales displaying the focused patterns Maya had learned meant he was processing complex data. The Drakmori scientist had initially been reluctant about the arrangement, but his attitude had gradually shifted as the research progressed. The latest neural mapping results are extraordinary, he announced, his scales flickering with what Maya recognized as scientific excitement. Their sensory processing capabilities are evolving beyond anything we predicted. Maya looked up from where she was playing a puzzle game with Shimmer, the smallest of the 3 hatchlings. The little one had earned the nickname from the way her scales seemed to reflect light differently than her siblings. Show me. Dr. Korthak activated the main display, showing 3-dimensional brain scans that rotated slowly. Normal Drakmori hatchlings show basic sensory development in their first year. These 3 are displaying neural complexity we don't typically see until adulthood, and in regions we've never seen active before. Phoenix, the largest hatchling who had earned his name from his fierce protective instincts, looked up from his own puzzle and chittered at the display. Maya had learned to recognize that particular sound as his way of asking for explanation. He wants to know what we're looking at, Maya translated, still amazed at how quickly she'd learned to communicate with them. Dr. Korthak's scales shifted to amused greens. Indeed, Phoenix, we are studying images of your brain. You are quite intelligent, more than we initially thought possible. Phoenix made a satisfied sound and returned to his puzzle. which was significantly more complex than anything normally given to juvenile Dracmori. He solved it in half the expected time. Frost, the middle hatchling whose pale scales sometimes showed hints of blue in certain lights, was curled up near the observation window, apparently asleep. But Maya had learned that Frost was rarely actually sleeping during these times. His enhanced senses seemed to require regular periods of reduced stimulation to process the constant flood of sensory information. There's something else, Dr. Korthak continued, his scales shifting to more serious patterns. The energy readings from their neural activity are off the charts. They're generating electromagnetic fields that shouldn't be possible for creatures their size. Maya felt a chill of concern. Are you saying they're dangerous? Not dangerous, Dr. Korthak clarified quickly. But they're definitely unique. These electromagnetic signatures might explain some of the enhanced sensory capabilities. They could be naturally occurring bioradars, able to sense objects and movements through electromagnetic reflection. As if summoned by their conversation, Shimmer abandoned her puzzle and walked over to the wall display showing the external camera feeds. She pointed with one delicate claw at a section of empty space near the station. What is it, little one? Maya asked, following her gaze. Shimmer made a series of chirps and clicks that Maya was still learning to interpret. The hatchlings had developed their own communication system that seemed to blend traditional Dracmori vocalizations with something entirely new. Dr. Korthak's scales suddenly shifted to alert patterns. She's detecting something. Check the long-range sensors. Maya pulled up the sensor data and felt her heart skip a beat. There, exactly where Shimmer had been pointing, was a small asteroid that hadn't been there an hour ago. It was on a trajectory that would bring it dangerously close to the station. How did she know? Maya breathed. Electromagnetic field detection, Dr. Korthak said, his voice filled with awe. She sensed the asteroid's mineral composition and trajectory long before our instruments could register it. Phoenix and Frost had both perked up now, their attention focused on the same area of space. All three hatchlings began making coordinated sounds that Maya had never heard before. A complex harmony that seemed to resonate through the station's hull. They're communicating about it, Dr. Korthak observed, his recording equipment capturing every nuance. This is unprecedented cooperative analysis behavior. The asteroid alert klaxons began sounding throughout the station as the automated systems finally detected the threat. Maya was already at the communications panel, alerting station control about the incoming object. The response was swift and professional, but Maya noticed that the evasive maneuvers they initiated were precisely what the hatchlings had seemed to be suggesting through their vocalizations. Captain, we have an update on the asteroid trajectory, came the voice from station control. Our analysis shows it contains rare earth metals that would have damaged our sensors if we'd been hit. How did you detect it so early? Maya looked at the three hatchlings, who were now calmly returning to their activities as if predicting asteroid impacts was just another day at the office. Advanced early warning systems, she replied, which was technically true. Dr. Korthak's scales were cycling through patterns Maya associated with paradigm shifts in thinking. We need to expand the research parameters immediately. If they can detect asteroids at this range, what else might they sense? Over the following weeks, Maya and Dr. Korthak designed increasingly sophisticated tests. The hatchlings could detect mechanical failures hours before diagnostics registered problems. They sensed emotional states in other beings from across the station. Most remarkably, they seemed to predict solar flare activity with startling accuracy. The implications are staggering, Dr. Korthak said during one of their evening research sessions. These abilities could revolutionize space travel, mining operations, even diplomatic relations if they can read emotional states this accurately. Maya watched Shimmer, who was currently engaged in what appeared to be a conversation with the station's AI through the terminal interface. The little one had figured out how to access the system and seemed to be teaching it new pattern recognition algorithms. Dr. Korthak, Maya said slowly, what if the ancient stories about Albino Dracmori were right but misinterpreted? His scales shifted to curious patterns. Explain. What if they could sense disasters coming? What if albino hatchlings were always born before periods of great change or danger, not as the cause, but as early warning systems? The plagues, the crop failures, the predator attacks, what if they were trying to warn their people? Dr. Korthak was quiet for a long moment, his scales cycling through deep contemplation patterns. That would mean we've been exiling our most gifted individuals for centuries, condemning them to death for possessing the very abilities that could save us. Phoenix approached them, carrying one of his puzzle toys. But instead of asking for a new challenge, he set it down and used his claws to manipulate the pieces into a pattern Maya didn't recognize. Dr. Korthak's breath caught. "That's a star chart," he whispered. "He's showing us the Zephyr system, but there's something wrong with it." Phoenix chirped urgently and pointed toward the communication array. Shimmer and Frost immediately joined him, all three displaying signs of distress Maya had never seen before. "They're trying to tell us something about home," Maya realized. "Something urgent." Dr. Korthak was already moving toward the long-range communications panel. "If they can sense solar flares here, perhaps they can detect stellar anomalies across interstellar distances." As the communication system powered up to contact Zephyr Prime, Maya looked at the three hatchlings who had been rejected by their own people. If her suspicions were correct, they were about to prove that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most feared packages. The transmission to Zephyr Prime would take hours to reach its destination, but Maya had a sinking feeling that whatever the hatchlings were sensing, time was running out. The emergency transmission from Zephyr Prime crackled through the station's communication array. At Oro 300 station time, Maya bolted upright in her bed as the priority alert klaxons wailed, but she wasn't the first one awake. All three hatchlings were already clustered around her door, their pale scales glowing faintly in the emergency lighting. "Maya, get to the command center immediately," came Dr. Korthak's urgent voice over the intercom. "We're receiving a distress call from my homeworld." Maya threw on her clothes and rushed through the station corridors, the hatchlings keeping pace beside her. They moved with a purposefulness that sent chills down her spine. Phoenix took point, his head swiveling as if tracking threats only he could perceive. Shimmer and Frost flanked Maya protectively, their usually playful demeanor replaced by intense focus. The command center was chaos when they arrived. Dr. Korthak stood before the main display, his scales cycling rapidly through patterns of distress and disbelief. The transmission from Zephyr Prime showed Elder Thraxus, but the proud leader looked haggard, his normally pristine scales dulled and patchy. "Dr. Korthak, the situation is deteriorating rapidly," Thraxus was saying. "The star's output has become increasingly unstable over the past solar cycle. Our scientists cannot explain the anomalies, and the radiation levels are approaching dangerous thresholds for planetary life." Maya felt her blood turn cold. "When did this start?" Dr. Korthak's voice was hollow. "Approximately 6 months ago, right around the time we left with the hatchlings." The three albino Drachmori had positioned themselves in front of the main display, their attention completely focused on the image of Elder Thraxus. Shimmer began making a series of complex vocalizations, her pale eyes fixed on something beyond the visible transmission. "She's scanning him," Maya realized. "Even through the transmission, she's reading his biometric data." Phoenix joined in with his own vocalizations, and soon all three were engaged in their unique harmonic communication. The sounds they made seemed to resonate through the station's hull, creating standing wave patterns that made Maya's teeth ache. "Can you understand what they're saying?" Maya asked Dr. Korthak. His scales shifted to frustrated yellows. "It's beyond traditional Drachmori communication. They've developed something entirely new." He paused, listening more carefully. "But there are elements." "They're discussing stellar mechanics, electromagnetic field fluctuations, and time." The transmission from Thraxus continued, painting an increasingly dire picture. "The crops are failing throughout the agricultural sectors. The breeding pools have become too warm for healthy development. Our orbital installations are reporting power fluctuations that our engineers cannot explain." Maya's mind raced as pieces of a terrible puzzle began falling into place. "Dr. Korthak, what if the hatchlings weren't just warning us about immediate dangers? What if they were sensing this stellar instability months ago?" "Impossible," Dr. Korthak began, but his protest lacked conviction. "The distances involved, the complexity of stellar dynamics." Frost approached the communication panel and began manipulating the controls with remarkable precision. The display shifted to show detailed stellar analysis data that Maya didn't remember the station's instruments being capable of generating. "How is he doing that?" Dr. Korthak demanded. "The same way Shimmer interfaces with the AI systems," Maya said, understanding dawning. "They're not just reading electromagnetic fields, they're generating them." They can interact directly with electronic systems through bioelectric manipulation. The stellar data Frost had called up painted a chilling picture. Zephyr Prime's star was indeed destabilizing, but not in any pattern the station's computers could predict. The electromagnetic fluctuations were following a complex rhythm that seemed almost organic in nature. Phoenix suddenly broke away from his siblings and approached Maya. His pale eyes held an intelligence that still took her breath away, and when he spoke, his vocalizations were clearly directed at her with unmistakable urgency. "What is it, Phoenix? What are you trying to tell me?" The large hatchling turned to Dr. Korthak and began a series of sounds that gradually resolved into recognizable Drakmori speech patterns. "Home, danger, not star, something else." Dr. Korthak's scales went white with shock. "He's speaking. Coherent adult speech patterns from a juvenile who's barely 8 months old," Phoenix continued, his voice gaining strength and clarity with each word. "The star is not sick. Something feeds on its energy. Something hidden. We can sense it because we can see the electromagnetic shadows it creates." Maya felt the world tilt around her. "You're saying there's some kind of entity feeding on your star?" Shimmer and Frost approached, adding their own voices to Phoenix's explanation. Their speech wasn't as developed as their brothers, but their intent was clear. They described a massive presence that existed partially outside normal space-time, feeding on stellar energy while remaining invisible to conventional sensors. "The stories," Dr. Korthak whispered, his scales cycling through patterns of dawning comprehension. "The ancient stories about Albino Drakmori bringing disasters. What if they were the only ones who could see the threats that were already there?" The transmission from Zephyr Prime suddenly cut off, replaced by static and error messages. Maya immediately attempted to re-establish contact, but the communication array was detecting massive electromagnetic interference from the Zephyr system. "Phoenix," Maya said urgently, "can you three work together to get through that interference?" The three hatchlings exchanged glances that held more communication than most species managed with hours of conversation. Then they moved to positions around the command center, forming a triangle with the communication array at its center. What happened next defied everything Maya thought she understood about biology and physics. The hatchlings began generating coordinated electromagnetic fields that created a resonance pattern throughout the station. The interference cleared instantly, and contact with Zephyr Prime was re-established. Elder Thraxus's image flickered back to life, but he was no longer alone. Behind him, Maya could see other Drakmori elders, their scales displaying the deep emergency patterns of a civilization in crisis. "Dr. Korthak," Thraxus said, his voice barely controlled, "we need your help. Our scientists have detected something massive in our star's corona, but we cannot determine what it is or how to combat it." Maya looked at the three albino hatchlings who had been cast out as cursed monsters. They had grown from tiny, helpless creatures into beings capable of sensing threats across interstellar distances and communicating with technology through pure bioelectric manipulation. "Elder Thraxus," Maya said, stepping forward, "we think we know what's attacking your star, and we might be the only ones who can stop it." The three hatchlings arranged themselves in front of the display, their pale scales beginning to glow with an inner light Maya had never seen before. Whatever was feeding on Zephyr Prime's star was about to discover that the cursed children of Drakmor had grown into something far more powerful than anyone had imagined. "But we're going to need to come home," Maya continued, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was proposing. "All of us." Elder Thraxus's scales cycled through patterns of desperate hope and lingering fear. Behind him, the fate of an entire civilization hung in the balance, waiting for three albino outcasts to save the people who had abandoned them. The journey back to Zephyr Prime aboard the research vessel, Harmony, was unlike anything Maya had ever experienced. The three albino Drakmori, now approaching full adult size, had transformed the ship's sensor array into something that defied conventional physics. They stood in the modified observation deck, their scales glowing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the ship's instruments. Phoenix, now nearly 7 feet tall and possessed of an otherworldly grace, served as the primary navigator. His enhanced perception allowed him to plot courses through space by reading gravitational eddies and electromagnetic currents invisible to normal sensors. What should have been a 3-week journey was shortened to 10 days. The entity's influence grows stronger as we approach, Shimmer reported, her voice carrying the melodic quality that had developed as her speech abilities matured. She was monitoring the ship's defensive systems, her bioelectric interface allowing her to coordinate shields and countermeasures with superhuman precision. Frost, the most introspective of the three, had spent much of the journey in deep meditation, his consciousness somehow extending beyond the ship to probe the nature of their enemy. "It is ancient," he said during one of their planning sessions. "Older than stellar formation in this region. It feeds not just on energy, but on the electromagnetic patterns that constitute life itself." Dr. Korthak, whose scales had shifted to permanent patterns of amazement and concern, monitored their vital signs constantly. The electromagnetic output from their neural systems has increased exponentially, he reported to Maya. They're operating at energy levels that should be impossible for biological organisms. Maya watched the three beings who had once fit in her arms now filling the observation deck with their presence. They moved with perfect coordination, their pale scales creating an almost ethereal atmosphere as they worked. "Are they still them?" she asked quietly. "We are more than we were," Phoenix answered, having overheard her concern despite her whispered words. "But we remember the human who chose to love us when our own people cast us out. That memory anchors us to what we wish to remain." The ship's proximity alarms began sounding as they entered the Zephyr system. The star that had once shone with steady golden light now pulsed erratically, its corona writhing with unnatural movements. Massive tendrils of what looked like living plasma extended from the stellar surface, and within those tendrils, something vast and dark was barely visible. "By the ancestors," Dr. Korthak breathed, his scales shifting to colors Maya had never seen before. "It's enormous. How did something that size remain hidden for so long?" "It exists partially outside our dimensional framework," Frost explained, his voice carrying harmonics that made Maya's spine tingle. "It phases in and out of our reality as it feeds. Only during active feeding does it become visible to conventional sensors." The communication array crackled to life as Elder Thraxus's voice reached them from the planet below. "Dr. Korthak, the situation has deteriorated since our last contact. We're evacuating the outer settlements and the orbital stations have lost primary power. How long until you arrive?" Maya took over the communications. "Elder Thraxus, we're here now. We can see the entity feeding on your star. We need to coordinate with your defense forces immediately." "Defense forces?" Thraxus's voice carried the desperation of someone watching his world die. "Our weapons cannot even target something that massive. How can 3 exiled hatchlings possibly help us?" Phoenix stepped forward, his presence somehow causing the communication signal to strengthen and clarify. "Elder Thraxus, you speak to Phoenix, child of the rejected clutch you cast into the wilderness. We have grown beyond your fears and beyond your understanding. We offer our help not for your acceptance, but because Zephyr Prime is still our home." The silence from the planet was profound. When Thraxus finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "Phoenix? Is it truly you?" "We are all here," Shimmer added, her voice joining the transmission. Shimmer, who was deemed too small to survive. Frost, who was called weak and cursed. "We have become what we were always meant to be." "What are you?" Thraxus asked, and Maya could hear the awe and terror warring in his voice. "We are the bridge between what is and what could be," Frost replied. "We are the early warning system your people needed, evolved beyond your ability to understand. And we are your only hope of survival." The ship shuddered as gravitational distortions from the entity's feeding began affecting their systems. Through the observation windows, Maya could see the creature more clearly now. It resembled a massive jellyfish made of dark energy, its tentacles wrapped around Zephyr Prime's star like a parasite. Pulses of stolen stellar energy flowed through its translucent body, feeding some incomprehensible alien metabolism. "It's been dormant for centuries," Phoenix explained as he coordinated with the ship's navigation systems. "Our birth triggered its awakening. We were born as a response to its presence, but our people's fear prevented us from developing our abilities properly." Maya felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The historical accounts of disasters following albino births, they weren't caused by the albinos. They were early warning signs that something like this was approaching. "Precisely," Shimmer confirmed. "But now we have had time to grow, to understand our purpose. We can do what we were meant to do." Dr. Korthak's scales had shifted to patterns of scientific fascination overriding his fear. What exactly do you intend to do? That entity is the size of a small moon. The three albino Drachmori exchanged one of their wordless communications, and Maya saw their scales begin to glow brighter. We are going to sing to it, Frost said simply. Sing? Maya asked. Our electromagnetic fields can be modulated to create resonance patterns, Phoenix explained. If we can match the entity's dimensional frequency, we can force it back to its own reality. And if you're wrong? Dr. Korthak demanded. Then we die as we lived, Shimmer replied with serene acceptance, as outcasts trying to save a people who rejected us. Maya felt her heart breaking and swelling with pride simultaneously. These magnificent beings, who had every right to leave Zephyr Prime to its fate, were instead preparing to sacrifice themselves to save their homeworld. There has to be another way, she said desperately. Phoenix approached her, his massive form somehow still managing to convey the gentle nature of the tiny hatchling she'd once cradled. Maya Chen, you gave us the chance to become who we were meant to be. Now we must use that gift for its intended purpose. The ship's instruments began registering massive power buildups as the three albino Drachmori prepared for what might be their final act. On the planet below, millions of Drachmori faced extinction, still not fully understanding that their salvation lay in the hands of the three children they had condemned to die. Maya gripped the ship's railing as the three began to sing, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to bend the fabric of space itself around them. The real battle for Zephyr Prime was about to begin. The song that emerged from the three albino Drachmori was unlike anything in Maya's experience. It wasn't merely sound, but a complex weaving of electromagnetic frequencies, gravitational harmonics, and something that touched the very fabric of reality itself. The ship's hull resonated with their voices, creating standing waves that made the entire vessel sing in sympathy. Phoenix stood at the center of their formation, his pale scales now blazing with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in time with the entity's feeding rhythm. Shimmer and Frost flanked him, their own scales creating complementary light patterns that seemed to bend space around them. The observation deck had become a nexus of forces that Maya's instruments couldn't even measure. The entity is responding, Dr. Korthak reported, his voice filled with awe and terror. Its feeding pattern is becoming erratic. Through the reinforced windows, Maya watched the massive creature wrapped around Zephyr Prime's star begin to writhe. The dark energy that comprised its body flickered between visible and invisible as the Drachmori's song disrupted its dimensional anchoring. Tendrils of stolen stellar plasma began to leak back toward the star's surface. It's working, Maya breathed, hardly daring to believe it. But their success came at a visible cost. All three albino Drachmori were glowing so brightly now that looking at them directly was painful. Their scales had become translucent, revealing the incredible energy flowing through their bodies. Maya could see their vital signs spiking to dangerous levels on Dr. Korthak's monitors. They're burning themselves out, Dr. Korthak said urgently. At this rate, their cellular structure will collapse within minutes. On the planet below, Elder Thraxus's voice crackled over the communication system. The stellar output is stabilizing. Whatever you're doing, it's working. The radiation levels are dropping across all monitoring stations. Maya gripped the communication console. Elder Thraxus, we need your help. The three who are saving your world are dying in the process. Is there any way your people can assist them? The silence from the planet stretched for what felt like eternity. When Thraxus finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of regret. Tell us what to do. Phoenix's voice, though strained by the effort of maintaining their dimensional song, carried clearly through the ship's speakers. Our people must acknowledge what we are. The fear that rejected us also rejects our gift. Your acceptance will anchor us to this reality. I don't understand, Thraxus replied. Shimmer's melodic voice joined her brother's explanation. We exist between dimensions because we were pushed to the edges of Drachmori society. Bring us back through acceptance, and we can maintain the harmony that keeps the entity in its own realm. Dr. Korthak's scales shifted to urgent orange patterns. Elder Thraxus, you need to get every Drachmori on the planet to acknowledge the albinos as true members of your species. Their quantum state is partially determined by social recognition. It's like a form of psychic physics. Maya watched in horror as Frost began to flicker, his physical form becoming unstable. "Hurry!" she urged into the communicator. Down on Zephyr Prime, Elder Thraxus was broadcasting on all planetary frequencies. His voice reached every settlement, every orbital platform, every Drachmori in the system. "People of Zephyr Prime, I speak to you as your world faces its darkest hour. 3 of our own, cast out in fear and ignorance, are dying to save us all. Phoenix, Shimmer, and Frost of the rejected clutch, they are not cursed. They are gifted. They are not outcasts. They are heroes. They are not aberrations. They are our children." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Across the planet, millions of Drachmori voices joined in acknowledgement. In the settlements, the orbital stations, the deep ocean colonies, Drachmori began speaking the names of the 3 albinos. Not in fear or disgust, but in recognition and gratitude. The effect on the ship was instantaneous. The 3 albino Drachmori suddenly blazed with renewed light, but now it was warm and golden instead of the harsh burning white of before. Their forms solidified, their vital signs stabilized, and their song grew stronger and more complex. "The entity is retreating," Dr. Korthak announced, his voice filled with wonder. "It's being pushed back across dimensional barriers." Maya watched through the observation windows as the massive creature began to fade from their reality. Its tentacles released their grip on the star, and the stolen energy flowed back to where it belonged. The dark entity writhed once more, seeming to look directly at the ship with alien intelligence, before vanishing completely into whatever dimension had spawned it. The 3 albino Drachmori gradually reduced their song to a gentle harmonic that seemed to stabilize the local space-time around Zephyr Prime. Their scales slowly returned to their normal pale luminescence, and they swayed with exhaustion but remained standing. "Is it over?" Maya asked. Phoenix nodded, his voice hoarse but triumphant. "The entity has returned to its own realm. The barriers we've established will prevent its return for many centuries, long enough for the star to recover and your people to develop their own defenses." Elder Thraxus's voice came through the communicator, heavy with emotion. "Phoenix, Shimmer, Frost, can you forgive us? Can you forgive an old fool who let fear override wisdom?" Shimmer stepped forward, her melodic voice carrying no trace of anger or resentment. "Elder Thraxus, there is nothing to forgive. You acted according to the knowledge you had. Now you have new knowledge. What matters is what you do with it. Will you come home?" Thraxus asked, hope threading through his words. The 3 albino Drachmori exchanged one of their wordless communications, then Phoenix spoke for all of them. "We will visit, but our home is no longer bound to a single world. We have seen the spaces between stars, felt the currents that flow between galaxies. We are explorers now, guardians against threats that exist beyond normal perception." Maya felt a mixture of pride and loss. The tiny hatchlings she'd rescued had grown into beings of cosmic significance, protectors of entire civilizations. They no longer needed her protection, but the bond they'd formed would last forever. "Besides," Frost added with something that sounded remarkably like humor, "someone needs to keep Maya company on her research expeditions. Humans have a remarkable talent for finding the most interesting problems in the galaxy." Dr. Korthak's scales shifted to patterns of deep respect as he bowed to the 3 albino Drachmori. "I have spent my career studying evolution and genetics. You 3 represent something beyond our current understanding, conscious evolution guided by purpose and love." As the ship prepared to enter orbit around Zephyr Prime, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought them here. She'd started with a simple desire to save 3 abandoned babies. She was ending with 3 cosmic guardians who would protect entire star systems from threats that conventional science couldn't even detect. The albino hatchlings had been rejected by everyone until a human girl asked to keep them. Now they were the bridge between what was and what could be, living proof that sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages. Down on the planet's surface, millions of Drachmori looked up at their star with new understanding. The pale children they had once feared were now their greatest protectors. And somewhere in the space between stars, other threats that had never faced opposition were about to discover that the galaxy had new guardians. Maya smiled as she watched Phoenix, Shimmer, and Frost prepare for whatever challenges awaited them among the stars. The universe was vast and full of wonders, and she couldn't wait to see what they would discover together.